There are rumors that Zelensky and Putin might even meet one another fairly soon. I mean, I picked that up last week and had a conversation actually only yesterday. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but there are some rumors. One has to try and imagine in Putin's mind, what is he trying to achieve here? I'm not convinced that he really believes anymore that he can secure the whole of Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure that he will not give up on what he's got, and he may well try and achieve a bit more through some sort of, opening up this counteroffensive, or indeed putting more pressure on in the south and east, where the pressure hasn't gone away.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm James Hansen, and today we're talking about the latest on the war in Ukraine, and I'm delighted to be joined by Major General Tim Cross, former British Army commander and military logistics expert. General Cross, welcome to Frontline.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you again.
First of all, I just wonder if you can give us your assessment of what we're seeing at the moment in the northeast of Ukraine, where Russia are appearing to make some pretty significant gains.
Yes, they are, and it's always difficult to know, the scale of what's actually happening. But I think, to put it into context, we've had quite a long period of, I hesitate to use the word stagnation because a lot of people are being hurt and a lot of things are going on. But in terms of the front line moving backwards and forwards, it's been relatively stable. But during that period of time, two things plainly have been happening. One is that Ukraine are suffering from the fact that they are short of stuff, material, logistics, and so on. And particularly artillery ammunition and the other issues that have been very, very publicly talked about. But also Russia had been building up their own capability. They have undoubtedly raised their game. They've learned a lot. The Russians historically learn a lot when they're involved in this sort of stuff. And I'm not surprised, actually, they are putting in some sort of offensive at the moment. I don't say that to be clever, but we collectively, I think, have been talking that for quite a while. They've got an opportunity, a window which has opened with the American problem of not, providing their aid, etc., and others being pretty slow. And therefore, they've got this window of opportunity to push in further, seize more terrain. How far they will want to push, whether they'll really want to capture Kharkiv and so forth, is a matter of debate. But I do think it's quite a difficult moment for Ukraine. And it could turn out to be quite a significant moment in the whole of the conflict. I mean, lots of people are saying the right things. Grant Shapps, the defense secretary, was saying only this morning that we are 100% behind Ukraine, others are too, and that whatever they want to do, we will continue to support them. And those politicians will say the right things, but of course you've got to give the Ukrainians the ability not just to withstand what's going on now, but also to be able to conduct their own counteroffensive later on this year if they do really want to secure, regain the territories they've lost thus far. So it's an important moment. We'll see how this offensive develops over the next couple of weeks or so, and we'll see whether Ukraine is able to hold out. But it could be, I think it is a difficult time for them.
What do you think Russia's operational objective is in the northeast? I was reading some analysis by the Institute for the Study of War, and they were saying they believe Russia are trying to create a buffer zone in the northeast to try and limit Ukraine's ability to strike targets inside Russian territory, for example, Belgorod. And as a result, they think it's unlikely, although you obviously can't rule it out and you don't want to be complacent, that Russia will make a direct push for example, Kharkiv city. What's your reading of it?
Yeah, I understand that, and I don't think any of us really knows what the outcome of this will be. But I've read too about this idea of a buffer zone, but actually it's not that big in terms of the ability for the Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with the new weapons that are coming, etc. I can't honestly believe it's going to make that much difference. I think securing territory undoubtedly is an aim of Russia, and they still haven't given up on the whole idea of taking over the whole of Ukraine, and not just chunks of it on the east or in the north. So I suspect this is, I would say, from a military point of view, this is a not unexpected offensive, trying to achieve maybe potentially a breakthrough to push through the Ukrainian defensive. And as things develop, you then seize your opportunity. And if the front line does give them the opportunity to press on and surround or secure, the city, then that's probably what they will do. I mean, if you are Russian, why would you not want to do that? What they want to see is Ukraine basically capitulate. And if this puts further pressure on Zelensky and the leadership in Ukraine, then I think that's what the Russians will continue to try to do.
Do you think the gains we're seeing Russia making in the northeast of Ukraine at the moment are a direct result of the delayed American military aid?
Well, I wouldn't just put the blame on the Americans. I think collectively, we, the West, have been, we've been providing a lot of equipment, clearly, and a lot of support. And I don't want to diminish that. But nonetheless, all that we've given them as the months have gone by since the invasion is the ability to basically try to hold the line, to defend themselves. That has been a gap in the last few months. It has had an impact. There's no doubt about it. The American delay on providing the ammunition and equipment that they're now beginning to provide, and indeed other nations too, have been slow in delivering aid and material that they've promised, undoubtedly has given a window, as I said earlier, a window of opportunity to Russia. So I don't think there's any doubt that it is linked to that. Now, it also has to be said that Russia itself, when you're fighting these campaigns, you reach, in military parlance, what they call a culminating point, where you've pressed on, you've done all you can do, and you're taking casualties, and your logistics are stretched, and all sorts of other things, and you just have to pause. You have to sort of pull in your skirts, get things sorted, redesignate and reframe everything that's going on, and then press on again. And I think Russia has been at a culminating point for a while. They've now put in all sorts of measures to enable them to conduct this offensive. So it's linked to the American issue and the rest of the West issue, but I don't think it's entirely as a result of that. But it's not a surprise.
And it's interesting that we're speaking today when Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making a surprise visit to Kyiv. We understand, according to US officials, that artillery, attacker missiles, and air defense interceptors that were included in that recent aid package are already reaching Ukrainian forces. But do you think it is feasible that the tempo of deliveries can be increased?
Well, I was listening to earlier on to some of this conversation, and indeed with our defense secretary. And I don't want to be unfair, but you've got to separate out the political comments. And so yes, I'm sure nobody's lying. At the end of the day, some equipment will be arriving, but the issue is how much and how quickly, and how can they push on with the momentum to make sure they deliver what is necessary to first of all, of course, defend the turf that they're now defending, but then also to prepare them for their own offensive. This is a lot of equipment. But it's, the Americans are a big organization. They've got the sea lift and the airlift to deliver this stuff, but it will take a while. I don't think the scale of what we're talking about here, I don't think, to my mind, we're talking weeks, if not a couple of months before the sufficient combat power has been delivered to enable Ukraine to really be able to conduct offensive operations for themselves. So they've got to hold out. So what we're seeing arrive will be, no doubt, rushed to the front. And in particular, the artillery ammunition and the air defenses and the ATACMS and so forth will be very important. I don't want to diminish that, but the size and scale and timelines associated with that, I think we shouldn't be too optimistic. I think it will take a while before it really begins to make a difference.
I suppose one of the other questions is what more can the Americans do? It's interesting that the Biden administration says it's working on a new $33 billion package in which yachts, mansions, and artworks belonging to Russian oligarchs would be seized and sold to fund military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. I suppose it does beg the question, though, why has this not happened before now?
Yeah, well, I mean, it relates to the whole of the sanctions business, doesn't it? And I don't think sanctions have worked, really. I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with targeting individuals, but the scale and the ability to do that and really, generate sufficient resources to make a big difference, I'm not convinced is a big issue. I think the real issue for me is not just about equipment and material logistics. I mean, clearly, I come from a background of logistics, and logistics is undoubtedly the key to this. It's the ability of your weapon production, and Russia has ramped up their weapon production, significantly, and now spending probably 6%, something like that, of their GDP and so on. They have moved to a war footing. The West has been very slow in doing that. But it's not just that. If you want to conduct serious counteroffensives, you need to have the commanders and the in-place ability to bring together an all-arms battle. You need to bring together your infantry and armor and artillery and your engineering support and your communications and the other aspects of logistics and so forth to enable you to to conduct operational level campaigns. And that takes, A, it takes time to prepare, and B, you've got to have the commanders in place who know how to do this and who understand how to do it. And I think Ukraine has suffered from the fact that although they've done some fantastic stuff tactically, and their what we call the moral component of their fighting power has been very impressive, I'm not convinced that they've really got to the point yet where they're able to conduct operational level campaigns. They've been plugging gaps, they've been holding out in terms of defense, but they haven't been able to conduct serious counter-offensive operations at any senior, at any serious level. So the equipment, yes, of course, it's got to arrive, and yes, you can target, individuals and try and create money and so on. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to turn that into fighting power that delivers on the battlefield, and that's not easy. Russians actually traditionally have been very good at the operational level, particularly during World War II. But they have taken time, I think, to get their mind around this again. They've had to relearn some lessons, and I do think they are now in a position where they are being able to put, more pressure at that level.
Let's come on to the recent changes in military leadership and defense leadership in Russia. Obviously, Sergei Shoigu is out as defense minister. He's going to head the Security Council instead.
Yeah.
What is your reading of Putin deciding to move someone who has been and remains a long-term ally of the Russian president?
Yeah, he is. He's been minister for, I think, about 12 years. The guy who's replacing him, Belousov, or I never quite know how to pronounce these names, but anyway, he's a little known technocrat, but he has been flourishing. He's very good on economic stuff, and he's been advising Putin probably for close on 20 years or so. He is a man with spreadsheets, but at the end of the day, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But this war will be decided by the ability to generate the combat power through the procurement and the ability to deliver weapon systems and artillery ammunition and so forth. And I think bringing him in a way, strengthens Putin's position. And as he's now been re-elected, he's taken this opportunity to move a few people around. But I do think this appointment of the new defense minister makes sense. He is a guy, I think, who, potentially could make a difference. When you look back at some of the appointments that we made in World War II, for example, there were some really interesting times when individual people have had a real understanding of production and how to generate, efficiencies and effectiveness and so on in industry, did make a big difference. So I don't know this guy much. I mean, I've read a bit about him and I've heard a bit about him, but it does seem to me to be an appointment that makes sense. Now, where Shoigu has gone, he did, as you say, he's replacing the head of the Security Council, so he's not been completely kicked out, but he has been downsized in inverted commas.
What do you think it means for the future of General Gerasimov? There's been some speculation that the new defense minister may come in and want to see a change in the military command structure as well. Do you think that's feasible?
Yes, it is. I think, anybody that's put into a new appointment like this will look around and decide who are the people that he can or cannot work with. I mean, we shouldn't forget, the UK went through an extraordinary number of generals in World War II. I mean, hundreds of generals came and went pretty quickly in some places. And a lot of the time, it does come back to individual chemistry and confidence and trust. And these things take time to build. Now, I don't know who else he's got in mind, if he has got anybody else in mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't make some changes, bringing fresh thinking in and bringing in people that he personally, as I say, knows, has trust in, and he thinks will be able to deliver whatever it is that he now, wants to crack on with. So changes potentially, absolutely. Will they be significant and will he make wholesale changes? I don't know. I mean, Russia does have a habit of doing this. And we've seen a lot of changes over the last couple of years because clearly this campaign has not gone well. So, we'll have to wait and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were some changes.
When do you think we will see a fresh wave of Russian mobilization? A lot of people had expected it in the weeks immediately after Putin's so-called re-election.
Yeah.
Do you think we will see it now?
I think that yes is the answer. I think Putin, having been re-elected, trying to put yourself into the mind of these sort of guys is not easy, clearly. But you can imagine that he will now, having been re-elected, make these changes. He wants to see significant success this year, and we know that he can only be able to bring that about by ramping up production, getting all the war production levels and so forth. But also, he has got to mobilize some more people, particularly if he still has the intent of trying to secure the whole of Ukraine. If in his own mind, what he's thinking is, let's grab a little bit more territory, do this buffer zone that we were talking about before, or not, and not push on, beyond that, and then just sit there and say to Zelensky, you need to negotiate, and come from a position that I'm not going to give up the eastern provinces, I'm not going to give up Crimea, you're not in a position of retaking that territory, and therefore let's negotiate. There are rumors that Zelensky and Putin might even meet one another fairly soon. I mean, I picked that up last week and had a conversation actually only yesterday. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but there are some rumors. So, one has to try and imagine in Putin's mind, what is he trying to achieve here? I'm not convinced that he really believes anymore that he can secure the whole of Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure that he will not give up on what he's got, and he may well try and achieve a bit more through some sort of, opening up this counteroffensive, or indeed putting more pressure on in the south and east, where the pressure hasn't gone away. And Ukraine is struggling, going back to mobilization, Ukraine is struggling to mobilize people. I mean, a lot of young people are not signing up, and quite a lot have left. And they are, there's a lot of conversation going on in Ukraine about what to do about this. So I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Putin wants to increase the pressure, ramp up production, put these new people in place, and then, as you say, mobilize more people in order to be able to maintain the pressure, if not increase it.
It's fascinating what you said there about the potential, and I appreciate it is only speculation, but the potential for Putin and Zelensky to meet. How would that even work in practice? I mean, where would they meet, for instance?
Somewhere where hopefully you and I would not know, nor anybody else in the media. It has to be done, quietly behind the scenes, and it has to be done out of the spotlight of the media and the world's eyes. So, where would it be? Well, there are options. I mean, clearly, some of the Nordic countries have traditionally hosted peace talks. I don't know is the honest answer, but it would have to be. There would obviously be preliminary meetings having to go on, and conversations being had. But that happens in all of these conflicts. I mean, it's like Israel Gaza. There's lots of conversations going on, and you have officials at certain levels that get involved at certain stages before you ramp it up to your foreign ministers and so on, until you then have the heads of state meetings. So there's work to be done. I can't see it being done in Russia or Ukraine. So, Belarus potentially, I suppose, but maybe somewhere else, in the region. I can't see both of them flying off, to be honest, long distances. I suspect it will have to be on the ground in the neighborhood, in inverted commas. But I stress it's only speculation. I had picked it up. I picked it up from a couple of sources. So I'm not saying it's not happening. It's certainly possible. It may not be probable at this stage, but it is potentially the case.
And if we look at what Ukraine can hope to achieve realistically in the next few months, I mean, it's interesting, despite the Russian advances in the northeast, Ukraine continued to have some success striking targets within Russian territory, and indeed striking bases in Crimea, for instance. What do you think realistically is a good next few months for Ukraine?
I think that actually is, the key. I don't want to be dismissive or be less than positive about Ukraine. We all want Ukraine to do well. And we can talk about what does victory look like in inverted commas. But if they can regain territory on the ground, then fantastic. But they have got to have that ability, as we were discussing earlier. But I think what will put pressure on Putin is the fact that people, as I say, people like our own Foreign Secretary David Cameron, others in NATO, and indeed the Americans, are now beginning to say to Ukraine, you can use these weapon systems to strike deep into Russia, and therefore weapon systems like the ATACMS, like air power, drones, and so on and so forth, giving them the ability to strike deep inside Russia, not just into Crimea, but deep into Russia. And why wouldn't we have allowed them to do that? At the end of the day, Ukraine has been hit hard. Their infrastructure, in particular, their energy infrastructure, and so on. So I think if giving them the ability to do that and allowing them to do that is a very important message. And if they can begin to cause serious trouble deep inside Russia, then I think Putin may be, put in a position where he's having to scratch his head and think, we're not making progress on the ground. They have the ability to hit deeply, and we've got to somehow bring this thing to an end. So I do think that's
yeah.
a potential serious change.
No, it's really interesting. You mentioned that shift of stance in terms of how Western supplied weapons can be used by the Ukrainians. But I know there'll be much of our frontline audience who will be incredibly frustrated that throughout this conflict, it feels like the West have maybe been one step behind what Ukraine needs at that time, whether it was providing anti-tank missiles at the beginning, saying, no, that's not going to happen, and then we provide them, whether it's saying, yes, okay, now you can use Western supplied missiles to strike into Russian territory, even to go back to our earlier conversation, whether we should use seized Russian assets to fund the war effort in Ukraine. Why do you think it is the West, and maybe it's a perception, maybe it is the reality, seems to be one step behind?
I think it is a reality, actually. I don't think it is just a perception. What's gone on in the minds of our prime ministers, foreign secretaries, and so on, I think, particularly in places like Germany, people genuinely were very concerned about this, this campaign, war, spreading beyond the boundaries of Ukraine. And people took Putin's messages pretty seriously, and so they should. So when he started talking about, if you give them this stuff, I'm going to do X, and talking about tactical nuclear weapons and all this business, people, having to face some tough choices, and initially saying to themselves, I think, let's give Ukraine the ability to defend themselves, but we need to be very cautious about allowing them to, take a much, give them much more ability to strike deep into Russia because of the potential of what that may lead to. We've got supplies coming in through places like Poland. We've got NATO forces deployed elsewhere. And I can understand that. I mean, I don't want to be clever about it. Leadership is tough, and making some of these choices is not easy. But I do happen to believe that we have been very slow in allowing Ukraine to do what has been necessary. Again, I don't want to, hark back to history too much, but, look at World War II, when we were, holding out in those early years, 1940, etc. We took a long time for the Americans to send us what was, of course, in those days, we had to lease it and pay it all back. Hopefully, Ukraine won't have to pay it all back, but we had to, and it took us till only a few years ago to repay all this stuff from World War II. But it does take time, and I think the Americans, at one point, were probably thinking, well, we'll help Britain hold out, but the ability to, do we really want them to do other things? I don't want to, mix World War II too much, but I do think at the end of the day, we have been one step behind. And, this is, from a Ukrainian point of view, this is a war of national survival. I think we need to give them the ability to really try to strike deep and conduct offensive operations. Whether they will succeed or not is another issue. I can't see Russia being defeated. That's, at the end of the day, I come back to the reality, or I think the reality, that I just can't see Russia being defeated. And therefore, Ukraine, we have to give Ukraine as much ability as possible to strike deep and to cause Putin to pause himself and to think about, okay, how do we bring this to an end? And it's in our interest to make sure that happens. I don't happen to believe that Putin is about to, have another crack at the Baltic states or wherever. I think, I just can't see him making a decision to take on NATO in that sense. But I do think that if he does reasonably well in this campaign, the grey zone undoubtedly will open up. But he's doing it already to some degree. The cyberspace, attacks, and so on. I think the pressure supporting people like Serbia over issues like Kosovo, I think he will continue to create trouble. And therefore, the more we can do to ensure that he doesn't come out of this too well, the better. But we have been behind the power curve, in my view. I mean, I stress, I don't like criticizing senior leadership, publicly, because it's tough business. But overall, looking back and looking at where we are today, I think we have been behind the power curve.
Major General Tim Cross, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today on Frontline.
Okay, good to talk to you.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more, click subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can listen to Times Radio, and you can read more about the war in Ukraine and global security with your Times digital subscription.